Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of Mythbusters. And today we're going to focus on food. And we've got with us Martin from ProVeg UK. Martin, do you want to introduce yourself and the organisation?
Yes, I will. Hi everybody. My name is Martin Skingley. I'm the education manager at ProVeg UK. So, we're an international food awareness organisation, mainly working to reduce the number of animal products used across the globe. In the UK specifically, we work on school meals. So, we try to make school meals more healthy, more sustainable, and also tastier by trying to increase the uptake of sort of plant-based options and all around sort of plant-based foods.
Cool. And you've done some awesome work pulling together five really common myths that we're going to bust. So let's start with number one, which is there is not enough food to feed our growing population.
Yeah, so a big one to start with, absolutely. Yeah, obviously, food is a very tricky business. Worldwide, actually, there's still more than 10% people that are actually hungry, don't have enough food. Yet, roughly about a quarter of our people are overweight or obese. And with the growing population, it's expected to reach, I think, 10 billion by 2050. We need to sort of start thinking about how can we feed all these people, and also how can we feed all these people without causing more damage than we already done. Simply though, there is enough food for everybody. We see that the problem that we face right now is not that we don't have enough food or a lack of food. It's more to do with efficiency and actually using the food and the land that we already have. Now, there is an increasing demand for meat and dairy. About 60% of actually agricultural land is just used for livestock grazing. And also later in the food process, we lose one third of food through waste. And this is from transportation or storage, when it's sold, cooked, all parts of the area. One third of food actually never gets consumed. So it's sort of not a necessary problem that we've not got enough. It's that we need to look after and be better with the food that we've got. Ultimately, I think it's 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted every year, which is phenomenal to think about. So what we sort of need to do is we need to produce food that's healthy, obviously, but also sustainable, that we can work with nature, not against it. Three-quarters of our population actually get most of its nutrients from plants. So I think plants is a good way to sort of get this going and get food for everybody and be fair, really. Um, Now, what we need to do is we need to sort of make sure that we're looking after our biodiversity, really, because that's something that fits in. Because actually, although we get a lot of food from our plants and crops, four main crops, so wheat, corn, soya, and rice, make up the vast majority of the food that we eat. So what we need to do is we need to look after that, because with climate change and things like that coming in, there's more natural disasters and things like that that are actually affecting those crops. So we need to make sure that we can diversify our products and our food to sort of look forward to the future, so that if we have more of these natural disasters, which are happening with climate change, that we're able to kind of sustain that. So obviously, when disasters happen, that affects distribution, production, the land, roads, and everything gets lost up. And often, unfortunately, it's the poorer people who suffer most when this happens, not really the more developed world. So we need to work on making sure that climate change doesn't affect our food in the future. So what we really need to do is make sort of more climate-friendly food choices. Eating more plants is obviously the way to start. Also, eating plants reduce the risk of zoonotic diseases. So this is when diseases transfer from animals to humans. We've obviously seen one relatively recently in our history that's happened, and that's affected us massively. So what we need to sort of do is sort of adopt more plant-based diets, which hopefully use less land, use less greenhouse gases, emit less greenhouse gases, sorry, and requires less water. And all of this is sort of a behavioural change from all of us. So we all need to look at more sustainable diets and the way we feed and we eat, so that we can ultimately help feed the whole planet, really, going forward.
Okay, God, that was a good one. So what about number two then? Buying local is good for the planet.
Yeah, so this is another one you often hear. You see adverts and posters and everything up about buying local. And often people think, yeah, if I buy local, that is helping the planet. I'm really afraid to say that that actually is not really quite the way. Most emissions, when we are talking about food production, comes from the production of it, not the transportation. So in our food system, It's actually responsible for 1/3 of all global gas emissions, greenhouse gases they are. That is from the food system, and that's from sort of farm to fork. So actually, the big problem is actually more not the transport, actually what the food is. So eating local, I'm afraid, is not a climate solution. The source of emissions do vary between foods, though, it is fair to say. In crops, a lot of the greenhouse gases and the problems come from pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. But in beef, what is sort of quite interesting is actually it's less than 1% of the emissions involved in beef comes from the transportation. So it's actually not necessarily where you get it from, it's what we are eating. They do produce a lot of gases, not through transporting, through burping. And the kids always laugh that. Cows burp a lot, they fart a lot, and that's a lot of methane gas being released into the atmosphere. So what we need to look at is we need to get better food. So food that isn't causing deforestation, doesn't emit huge greenhouse gases, doesn't degrade our soil, um, and that's what we need to look at. But it's not the food that necessarily cause these problems, people do. So it's not actually the food's fault, shall we say. So what we need to do is we need to sort of make sure we put pressure on the people who do have the power and influence over things like this. Government, for example, there's something coming up soon with the government, so think carefully about who you pick for that. And it begins with you, really. Your food choices do ultimately work for that. Now, eating locally can be a means of supporting local farms, and some of them are being more environmentally friendly. They're using less pesticides, and all sorts of things like that. So it can make a tiny difference, and you can think you're doing your part. Often it's good for social communities, building communities together, producing things from local areas, and supporting that. But unfortunately, sort of this idea of buying better meat, local meat, is not a climate solution. Better meat, when they talk about higher welfare, that often has a higher impact on the environment because more land is needed, often more water is needed. And so, what we really need to be doing is eating less meat, and ultimately even less meat, and ideally even less meat. So, if you really want to make a difference to the planet, you really want to be sustainable and doing your bit. It is actually what you eat, not where you get it from, I'm afraid.
Cool. That's a good explanation there. I know in schools we often see activities around food miles. And kind of
Yes.
it can be interesting to explore that, but in terms of, like you say, kind of meaningful climate action, it's not really the thing to focus on.
No, I mean, avocados are often seen as this demon food, but most of our food comes by boat, and actually, that is a relatively sustainable way to transport food. So, yeah, it's what you eat, not where it's from.
Okay, number three, we need to choose between nutrition and protecting the environment.
Yeah, so often we sort of see the argument that we can't have both. We want to be healthy and have all our food and get what we need and our nutrients. We can't then have that at the expense of the planet. So if we actually look at what's happening right now in our current practices, animal-based food, we use about 80% of our agricultural land. Of all the land we can use for growing our food, 80% goes on animal-based food. Now, this is an area the size of Northern and Southern America combined. So a huge part of the planet is used for this. But actually, this only provides 37% of our global protein and 18% of calories. So what is happening is we are sort of seeing that what we think we're doing now is great, when actually it's not really doing what we want. So the production of these foods, although they're not great for our nutrition, also they do obviously harm the environment. And incredibly, actually, we're seeing more with studies that the meat that we're eating is actually harmful to our health. The World Health Organization, excuse me, have actually classed red meat as a group 2 carcinogen. Pretty much what that means is that they feel from their studies and some of the research that it probably causes cancer, which is quite worrying. And what's even more is we see a lot about at the minute with the processed foods or ultra processed foods, and processed meat's a big thing we've seen in lots of our media and things like that. And incredibly, that's classed as a class group 1 carcinogen. And that's actually classed alongside smoking tobacco. So what they're trying to say is that actually eating processed meat probably does cause cancer. And actually, there's studies to say that it does. So there's sort of more evidence around this that actually our current food system is not exactly providing us with the ideal nutrition to help and definitely does not help support our environmental sustainability. So what we're doing right now is not sort of gaining what we hoped anyway. Now, several foods, we're looking at grains, nuts, seeds, can actually do a little bit of both, which is obviously what we want. And studies are showing more and more that people eating fewer animal products are seeing lower rates of obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, and as we said before, cancer. So we're seeing actually reducing your animal products can improve your health and is improving people's health. And also, obviously, replacing these things not only benefits our health, but can benefit the animals, farmed animals, billions of whom sort of spend most of their lives in cages or crates where they aren't able to exercise, they can't do what they would naturally like to do, and they can't even turn around. Some are crammed in, so they can't really even move. So it also helps the animals. So what we're currently doing is not particularly great. So I think what we need to be looking at is the future and shifting towards maybe more plant-based foods because they're seen as a win-win for nature, for the climate, animal welfare, and our health. And more doctors, dietitians, health professionals, people a lot smarter than me, are sort of advocating now more of a plant-based diet because of the health benefits of that it brings and also the health risks that we're seeing that animal products actually bring to our health. In Canada, it's quite interesting. Their government now are explicitly recommending that people reduce the number of animal products they use, and that more countries are coming on board with this. So actually eating more fruit, veg, other plant-based foods and things, nuts, grains, everything like that, improving your intake of that and for your health. So actually, what we're seeing is that we can have both. There is a way of being able to be good for the planet and also good for our health. There is a way forward.
Cool. So number four, soya is the big problem. It's the thing to blame for deforestation.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is one of the ones you hear more often than not around this sort of area, that soya, and it's obviously to blame. And forests are massively important. Most of our sort of world's biodiversity actually live in forests. It's huge, and not only that for nature, but also for our climate. So they are great stores of carbon, and they sequester the carbon dioxide. So they not only have this nature side to them, but they also help our planet and help us as humans live on this planet. Now, unfortunately, yes, soya and agricultural expansion is going into this forest, and this is definitely, it's been studied that actually this is now the largest contributor to deforestation. In schools, you often see about recycle your paper, and there's always the big cycling bins, and that's great. But actually, the timber and the paper is not the biggest cause now of deforestation by far. It is agriculture, and soybean is a big cause of this. So in the sort of last half century, we've seen a massive increase in the number of soybean plantations around the world, but majority in these forests. And this is where sort of people begin to point the finger at the vegetarians and the vegans and the people eating these soya products. It must be soya burgers and tofu that's causing this. Um, Now, soy production does have a devastating um, effect on the environment, and there are environmental costs. But actually, the reasons that most of it is grown is not for our soya burgers and our tofu. It's actually to do with dairy, meat, and eggs and farmed animals, because it's believed 80 to 90% of soya beans are grown to feed these animals. It's their feed. So that sort of it is not to do with sort of vegetarianism, unfortunately. In fact, I think that only 6% of soybeans globally are actually consumed by humans. So the vast majority are being fed to our livestock that we're feeding up. The simple reason for this is it's very cheap. It's cheap and it's nutritious soya for human consumption, but also for animals. So this is easy for farmers to feed to their crop, not their crop, sorry, feed to their livestock to build them up quickly and feed them up. So that is why actually soya is devastating to forests. But the reason it is there is because of the livestock, because of the animals. One thing I always find interesting, I actually discovered when I was sort of researching for this, is that the average European actually consumes 61 kilograms of soya every year through the animal products they eat. So whenever someone sort of says, "Oh, I couldn't eat that," Mark, actually you are eating some of that, I'm afraid, through the animals that you're eating because they are fed majority And we're talking chickens, beef, even fish as well is fed on these soybeans. So obviously, as large areas of land are being cleared for this, ecosystems are being destroyed, which is bad for nature. But again, it also affects our planet. These are great stores of carbon, as I said before. And actually, when they're cut down, that carbon, the carbon dioxide, is released back into the atmosphere. So we need to make sure we are protecting our forests, not just because we don't want more animals being fed to people, but also because we need to protect our planet. So that's one thing. Now, the population is increasing, as you said earlier, and animal-based foods are actually on the rise. So more people, more people wanting animal food. So actually, more land in the future could potentially be cleared for this soya. So this is where we need to step in and think about it carefully. So deforestation is not being caused by the vegetarians. It's actually our demand for meat. Now, soy is a very good product. Don't get me wrong. It's a very good crop. Actually incredibly land efficient as well. So we can get our protein from it and humans can. Actually, if you were producing protein through soybeans, if you needed to do chickens, you'd need 3 times the amount of land to get the same protein in chickens. I think it's about 9 times land for pork, and incredibly, beef, you'd need 32 times more land to get the same protein from beef as you can from your soya. So if we were sort of to swap out most of our meat for soya, that would massively reduce deforestation because it is not the vegetarians, I'm afraid, that are causing that. It is our animals.
Okay. That you've made that really clear. Great. And that is also a really good segue for myth number 5. So the last one is you can't get enough protein from a plant-based diet.
Yeah, so this is probably the biggest one you hear with the future and sustainable and plant-based eating. Well, we can't do that. We can't get more protein. Where do you get it all from if you can't eat meat or animal products? Now, this actually is almost more of a cultural problem than a nutritional because it's sort of a culture that we sort of see meat as this center of the plate, and that's where you get everything from. If you ask a child to sort of create a meal or draw a meal, often it's sort of the meat in the middle, and that's where all the things like vegetables and beans are sort of seen as side dishes, not sort of that important. So actually, that cultural and historical uh, element of it plays into this. Now, protein is incredibly important. It's one of the main building blocks of the body. Scientists will cover this a bit better than me, but it's good for growing, repairing your tissue. It also helps our hormones, our immune systems function properly. So it is very important. And we do need to get this. However, there are different ways that we can get it because it's our amino acids that we need. Now, again, I did a bit of research to this, get my science correct. So there are 20 amino acids we get from our protein. Now, 11 of them are non-essential. So actually, we don't need to get them from eating, but 9 are essential. So protein is really important. We do get it. So to say you don't need protein is incorrect. We do need it. But in regard to that, actually, what most people don't always realize is we are getting quite a lot of protein from just normal diets. And actually, it's important that most people don't need that much protein in order to reach their daily requirement. Our bodies are incredibly good at recycling protein. And often when we do exercise or strenuous activities, they prefer other materials or other fuels, sorry, such as carbohydrates. In fact, the average UK adult gets more than 50% extra protein than actually they need. So we've been sort of programmed to believe that meat and other animals are sort of our ideal source. And these are what people have historically eaten to get their protein. And one thing they don't always realize is actually that animals are the middlemen or middle women. I don't know if there's a double side to that. Because actually the majority of animals get their protein from plants, where actually all proteins originate. I always do this with children. I sort of say, if you think about an elephant, rhinos, gorillas, horses, in regards to their eating habits, what do they all have in common? And they're all herbivores. So I wouldn't fancy taking on in those in a strength contest or an arm wrestle. They seem to get more than enough protein to be strong, and they are all plant eaters. And there was a big study recently around sort of the nutrient intake of plant eaters and meat eaters, and they found the average meat eater gets more, oh sorry, plant eater gets more than enough protein. So we are absolutely fine. And meat eaters, again, sort of an argument back at them, they're probably getting about half their protein from plants anyway. So sort of that historical view of all you need to eat meat is not really scientifically based. In fact, actually, a peanut butter sandwich, one of my favourites, contains the same amount of protein as 3 eggs. So when you see people smashing back their eggs, just have a peanut butter sandwich, much more tasty. Um, and actually, sort of the important thing on this protein to follow on from is that actually animal-based products strip out a lot of these sort of other goodness that we do need. So they're not necessarily a great source of protein. Things like fiber and antioxidants. So actually, protein is not massively a problem with people getting it. These things are, and people aren't getting as much as they used to. Um, so what we need to do is sort of think about that. So meat and other proteins often change our sort of gut biome. This can cause sort of inflammatory problems, things like that. And this is sort of obviously not so bad in the short term, but also bad in the long term. It can cause heart disease and give you health issues further down the line. Now, plant proteins, actually, they still have those things left in. So often animal products strip out fiber and antioxidants, whereas plant proteins, they've still got all those goodness in there. So this can sort of improve your blood pressure. You get more fiber, antioxidants, and certain phytochemicals like vitamin C, which are really key. Actually, interesting, on average, plants have 64 times more antioxidants than animal foods. So even an iceberg lettuce actually has more antioxidants than a salmon or eggs. So again, that sort of argument of that, oh, you can't get what you need from plants, you absolutely can, and certain animals around the planet are doing it just fine. So sort of my final thing would be that plant-based diets actually are not to do with what you're losing or what you're taking out. It's actually what you're adding, and which is really important. So I think the future is certainly shifting towards more sustainable plant-based eating, if possible.
Cool. Thank you so much, Martin.
You are welcome.